see you. I'm joined by Nicky Ward. Nicky, hello,
Hiya.
good to see you.
You all right?
And for those who, you might know Nicky if you come along to some of our churches, or you're involved in online, because Nicky's one of our local preachers and has been heavily also involved in the work of the local church. Therefore, if I were to, we'll find more, but if I were to describe my understanding of sort of Nicky, it would be one, quite prepared to say what needs to be prepared in a loving way. Two, a bridge builder, definitely a bridge builder. I've known times when Nicky's spoken out in meetings in quite a healing way. And three, probably very confident in all age and appreciated for all age. And then four, I'll let Nicky talk about her work, but I'm aware about Nicky's work in the charity sector. So Nicky, tell us a little bit more than that. Maybe start with your work.
Okay, so yeah, it's an easy place to start, isn't it? I work for a charity called the Leprosy Mission, and we bring health and transformation to people affected by leprosy in 10 different countries. We're part of a fellowship across the globe, which is an incredible thing to be part of. And it really opens my eyes to where people are really at. Every day at work, whether I'm on the phone talking to a supporter or whether I'm looking at a story about somebody affected by leprosy, I see and hear real stories of triumph and difficulty and struggle and poverty and all sorts of things. And certainly when COVID first started, the amount of phone calls that we had from people who were so scared and so lonely, and just listening and praying with people over the phone. And that's one of the great things about my job. I get to pray with people. I don't have to hide my faith. In fact, I can share it and I can encourage people with the love of God. So I'm really blessed in what I do. I'm currently the manager of a team for the supporter relations side of things, but I actually started at the mission as the cleaner.
Right.
So I've gone through lots of different entities. I went into gift aid, and then I went to college to learn bookkeeping and stuff like that, and became the finance manager eventually. I then got seconded into our data team and learned how to do coding and helped build
coding. Right. Okay. Yeah.
Computer coding. So I learned how to do that to help with building our new database. And now I'm learning how to manage a team and encourage people and think strategically, which, yeah, this is a new challenge. So I'm glad that Jesus walks ahead of me because he's got the strategy. I just need to keep my eye on him, really. But yeah, so that's what I do for work. I'm currently living in my 32nd home.
Really?
Yes.
So that's something about you. So yeah, me, Jesus, and the church. So that is, I've never known that before. Tell me more. I mean, really intrigued.
Well, my father was in the forces, so we moved around a lot. But we also moved within places. So even though we were somewhere for maybe 3 years, we might have moved several times while we were there.
Right.
And at one point, my dad was posted somewhere in the middle of a different posting. So we moved again. I went to one school for 7 weeks.
Crazy.
And I've actually been to 13 schools.
Right.
So, and somebody in the church once said to me, wow, it's amazing that you can read and write. And I suddenly thought, I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that, even all the way back, kind of being able to do things like reading and writing was not actually a given for me. And so when I hear about young children, I've got friends who are teachers, when I hear about young children moving into school midway through a term or something, not knowing anybody, not necessarily knowing the language or how things are done, I have complete empathy. I probably don't know how they feel, but I know how I felt when that was happening to me. But it also kind of meant that I didn't have any friendships that lasted.
Right. Okay. I mean, that I was going to ask. So, just piecing together how that sort of shaped you, really. So, friendships that never really lasted.
No. You know, I would move in, and somebody I would get friends with would move out. You know, I was lucky to have a friend maybe for 18 months.
Wow.
And because of the way people move around, I'm not very good at keeping in contact. I don't know whether that's just because of the way I grew up, or just because. But I put it down to the way I grew up, and people were just moving all the time, and you lose touch, and that's it.
I'll be really interested when we come to the second part and we think about now how things are a little bit more settled and relationships in the church. So we'll come on to that later. I think that's a really interesting thing. Another thing that springs to mind is even though we can be in certain places and have very little contact with people, the contact we do have can be hugely influential. I was thinking the other day, for example, you know, I was at Cliff College when I did my MA, and Martin Atkins was my tutor. I must have had maybe 3 hours plus of tutoring face to face with him, maybe a bit more, 6 perhaps, maybe that. But just that the person that God sent, so to speak, that was there support had a huge impact. So I'm interested to hear about that later. So that's the you bit, which is I love it when I understand something else about people, you know, that I never knew. Tell me about your faith. And we talked a little bit before, and healthily Nick talked about how he was a cradle Methodist, taken a lot literally in the cradle by his mum, and then he went to a festival when he was a teenager, and that suddenly meant that, I mean, it was wonderful to watch him struggling to explain what happened, because you can't in a way, but for him Jesus became real. Now your experience is somewhat different, isn't it?
I think it is the total opposite of that. I maybe had a touch, possibly 3 months, where in total over my childhood, where maybe I had been at a Sunday school. So as far as I'm concerned, I never went to Sunday school.
Right.
Because I barely even remember stepping foot in a church. I have always been a very spiritual person. I've always believed that there is something more than just me, just us, and that that something was powerful. And from being a child, sitting very lonely in my bedroom, because I didn't currently have a friend. Right. You know, I would kind of, I suppose, what people would call pray, but I didn't know where that was directing to. You know, I would look at the moon and talk to it. So no real formal understanding of God at all. I then became interested in witchcraft.
Right.
And had a dalliance with that at one point. And yes, very dangerous. Don't do it.
Right. I was going to say game face. Game face is on. Yeah.
People to think, ooh.
That's interesting, Nicky. What I think that is really interesting. I think I'm heartily encouraged by the image of you sitting, of the little Nicky sitting on bed, looking at the moon out of the window, naturally thinking there's more to life than just there's a marveling going on there. I think the witchcraft thing is interesting. It interests me. I'm interested because it actually adopts a position. If I'm wrong, I mean, it is. I know it's broad. Of that, there is a spiritual. There is a sort of spirituality. I mean, what did you feel attracts people to witchcraft in particular?
Depending on how you come into it and in what you are looking at, because like you say, it's a huge spectrum. I think often people just want to help. People want to kick into a power that is very much there to make a difference, and to worship something that they can feel. Unfortunately, as the Bible says, not every spiritual thing is of God. And it's very easy to get sucked into thinking that you are doing good. I'm here to, perform this ritual or whatever in order that somebody can be well, or in order that somebody can be protected from the things that are happening to them, or whatever it might be. And people often split it between the dark and the light side.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. Yeah.
There's no difference. For me, from my understanding, there is no difference. The spiritual power behind it is the same, whether you're thinking dark or light.
It's a really interesting one, because I used to think, well, I had people sort of come to me, and I've prayed with people before, and actually it's come out of they've been sat in church, and I've preached and I've talked about the one Spirit and the Holy Spirit, and I've suddenly felt very convicted, and I found myself looking directly at somebody, and your eyes are, and you're thinking, crikey, something's being said there. And then I've gone up and had a conversation, and very often it's been pastoral, and interestingly, people have a sense of guilt or burden that they were formerly involved in that. And we're not here to absolve people in that way. I don't forgive anyone's sins, but the power of Jesus saying your sins are forgiven, or I'll put it this way, to say, now you know better, it's okay, now you've not been disliked. And so it is out there, and it's out there in that plethora of kind of the crossover with the fascination with what you might call the supernatural. And I hate that label, because everything's supernatural, isn't it?
Yeah.
But, the kind of I've got a good idea, let's hunt for ghosts, and then the peculiarity of the thought that the ghost only appears at night. I mean, because we all know that ghosts are nocturnal. And also, I'll bang again against Derek Akora, who's no longer with us. When they manifest themselves with someone else, it tends to be in their own accent. There's all that stuff, and I think people do tend to separate, don't they, the white magic from the black magic, and I just think, well, it's all in the wrong direction. So it's really interesting to hear that was an area that at first kind of you felt drawn to. But then tell me more, because Jesus is obviously there, otherwise we wouldn't be chatting now.
Very much. I had a very strange encounter with a member of the group that I was with, and screaming at me, leave me alone, you're too powerful, on his knees, as if he was being threatened. And I was stood there kind of going, what's going on?
Yeah.
And I subsequently have come to the understanding that God's hand on my life and God's protection of me was such that the spiritual forces that were in play were kind of understanding that God was there. And we read often in scripture where people shout out at people like Peter or Paul or whatever, and they will say, be healed or whatever, and this spirit leaves them. I'm not saying the person was possessed, but just that we are often influenced by stuff. And I think the influence of God's hand on my life and where this person was, so I kind of got thrown out, basically. So again, left to my own devices, thought I'd found something bigger than me. I was a single parent when I was, well, I still am. Though my daughters both have children, they're still my daughters. I'm still a single parent.
Yeah.
And it was difficult. It was really difficult. And I suppose I was looking for companionship. I was looking for help in my loneliness and stuff like that. And kind of maybe from being a young child again, innately knew that it was more than people that I needed.
Right.
And so hence the kind of going to different spirituality, because for me, church hadn't been an option. I had no understanding of it. And other than, actually it was probably boring, and it was middle class people who say one thing and do another. So that was my understanding of church, and there's no way that I'm middle class, and I certainly didn't want to be part of anything that was boring. So yeah, it wasn't an option. Yeah, I suppose I had this image of, it's all how's your father's? Oh man,
you're right. Yeah.
Figuratively not.
Well, I do listen to some people who've been trained in college who've come out with a strange voice, and I think, what went on? Did you actually learn that?
Yeah.
We did have a great guy, actually. He was called Philip Frupp. He came along and he used to do elocution lessons with it. I remember he made me read the definition of love from 1 Corinthians, in old English, stood there in the cold, the one that was at Diana's funeral service, and there was the phrase went round college that you've been thrupped, because but it was helpful. But you do think, actually, you're thinking there's that side of it, that otherworldliness that isn't helpful, the Pythonic, dear God, oh gosh, you're so big, I kind of get there. And so but your experience is different.
Yeah,
so Jesus.
So my encounter with Jesus, I kind of need to say just a little bit more about me, I think. Being on my own, I did look for companionship, like I say, and people often get caught in this trap. And my husband was incredibly violent, and so we parted. And subsequently, my partners were incredibly violent, and I kind of went from one relationship to another, looking for, that companionship, that life partner, and finding nothing more than distress, really. And it came to the point where, sorry.
It's okay.
Things got incredibly bad, and in 1989, something happened that nearly cost me my life. And my subsequent reaction to that nearly cost my partner his life. And I was then, I already had a criminal record, but my criminal record went up some stages.
All right.
And so I found myself in a place where I had lost my memory and still have no memory. I was diagnosed with having post-traumatic stress disorder, but I was also going through the court system, awaiting Crown Court. And within all of this, I ended up in a family centre where a member of the Methodist Church was, and eventually kind of invited me along to church. And I have to admit, I took rather a lot of liquid help to get through the door. And I went once or twice, and I met with the minister and asked lots of questions. But I just really felt like there was a barrier. And I made friends with somebody else who was a Christian. And she also had gone through domestic abuse as well. And I knew the ropes in terms of claiming benefits and stuff like that. And that's how we became friends. And when she said that she wasn't going to divorce her husband because she was a Christian and believed that there would be hope, I basically told her that she was an idiot.
Right.
In no uncertain terms, and kept telling her she was, and basically told her that she was stupid for being a Christian and all sorts of things, you know, really positive friendship and encouragement from me. Not. But she eventually got back with her husband, and being very angry about the domestic abuse side of things. If he came in the back door, I went out the front door. And if he came in the front door, I went out the back door, and never the twain shall meet. But then one day, I dropped my daughter off at school. I'd dropped my other daughter off at nursery. I was walking the street, and I was talking to somebody who physically wasn't there. And I kept hearing this voice that said, go round to your friends. And I was saying, no, I don't want to go round to my friends. You need to go round to your friends. I don't want to go round to my friends. He'll be there. You just need to go round to your friends. Go and see your friend. And it was quite a persuasive voice, in that I found myself knocking at my friend's door. And my friend's husband answered the door. But great. And he said, come on in. I was like, no, I'll come back another time. And I'm like, no, come on in. And they were supposed to be going to hospital. And they both said to me afterwards, they felt this great weight, burden, whatever you want to call it. I mean, we use so many jargon words in the church sometimes, but they felt this real understanding that God was doing something, and that though their son was poorly, they were to stay put. And so I was invited to have a cup of tea, and I'd never seen my friend reading her Bible, ever. And she was there reading her Bible. So I just asked, what are you doing? And so the conversation moved on, and I remember feeling this terror, because this power was within the room, and it was like lightning. It was so fearsome and powerful, and it was something I'd never, ever kind of been a part of. And I'd known power, but this was so much more. And I remember hearing my friend say, it's okay. You don't have to be afraid. It's just the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
And the conversation carried on, and bless them, they pulled out a pamphlet, a Christian pamphlet, with a prayer in the back and said, all you have to do is pray this prayer. Everything went dead. The power was no longer there. I kind of went, no. And that was it. And they said later that they were very confused because it was very evident that God was doing something, and suddenly everything had stopped. So they invited me to stay for lunch. And I said I needed to nip home first. So I nipped home, and I was going to get something out of my kitchen. Now, do you know where the things are in your kitchen? So if you want a cup, you know which cupboard to go to, don't you?
Yeah.
Me too.
Mm.
But I went into every cupboard looking for this thing, which I knew exactly where it was. And I remember opening one set of cupboard doors, looking in it, and the thing I was looking for wasn't there. And I just said out loud, I will never follow Satan again. I will follow you, Lord.
Mm.
And the whole place blew up in bright light. My knees buckled a bit, but I didn't fall on my knees. And I felt a feeling that I can only say would be joy.
Mm.
Wow. So deep within me. And just completely overwhelmed by this happening. And so I shut the cupboard doors, and I got the thing that I wanted from the cupboard where I knew it was, and went to my friends and said to my friend, guess what? So she said, what? I said, I think I'm a Christian.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I had no words to explain what had just happened to me.
Yeah.
And I hear lots of people saying, you know, oh, I'm born again, who are in the church. It's like, oh, okay, so that's what that is. Oh, right, okay. You know, and I'm a Christian now. Well, yeah, actually I am, but I wasn't actually that sure about it or what to call myself. And as we sat down to have lunch, their house was here and my house was perpendicular to theirs, and a rainbow was hitting my house.
Wow. Right. Yeah.
And subsequently, you know, many years later, I remember reading in the book of Isaiah, the Lord saying, I was angry with you, but like in the days of Noah, you know, I turned with compassion back to you.
So, right. Okay. So there was a theological kind of root behind that you discovered. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Because it's the simplest of signs, isn't it? The rainbow. And I always think, great. Yeah. We get kids to paint it. And we remember God destroyed the earth and then promised that he would do it. But we don't hear anything else about the story afterwards. But actually you knew enough about the story to know that the promise of, you know, that never again and that fresh start.
Well, I did when I found that, but within that passage in Isaiah, God also talks about rebuilding, and rebuilding not with just plain old, you know, bricks and mortar, but with precious stones. And when I read that, I really felt like God was sending me a message to say, you know, yeah, things were bad. You're not going to remember the reproach, you know, the shame of your youth, because there's a lot of shame in my youth. But I'm going to rebuild you, and I'm going to make things so different and so different that people are not going to recognize you. And I had proof of that one day. I was in a church meeting where lots of different churches had come together from different traditions. And there was somebody in there who had known me from my past. And they came up to me and kind of did the double check. You are Nicky, aren't you? Like, what are you doing here? And I explained that I'd come to follow Jesus. And I remember them saying, and it's always stuck with me, there must be a God. If somebody like you can become a Christian, there must be a God.
Yes. That's got world's best backhanded compliment. Thanks a lot. But I mean, Nicky, I think it's important to share. I mean, I did know that. I mean, I knew about that. I mean, you kind of joke about the escalating criminal record, and it does move us on. We'll have a little break in a second and talk more about the church. But obviously, you've talked about your experience, and although it's very bold, you know, that you're willing to share and talk, and I think you're going to encourage so many people. The one thing I said is that the one thing I've noticed, you've never hidden your experience away, and because it's interesting, because you know, when as you kind of trained as a local preacher, you've talked to every minister, that's every superintendent, and there are clear, distinct people who journeyed with you, who know about your experience, which gave me a lot of assurance as well. But I think one of the most poignant things that I have seen, that it was a privilege and also a pain, more of a pain for you, I think, to go through, was the Methodist Church's capacity in light of safeguarding. You know, when the DBS checks come in and it's like, hello, to actually have the capacity to hear your story. And I remember being in the same room with you when I heard that story, and I thought, crikey, this is tough listening for me when I listened to your experience, let alone how much it must have been to go through it for you. But also to know that the Methodist Church has, you know, taken what you've experienced, you know, taken your explanation for how you've changed, listened to the voices of others in the situation. And, you know, at the end of that, all you get is a letter saying, it doesn't say congratulations. It's going, thank you very much for sharing with us. We're pleased to say that you're able to continue in your role as.
Yeah.
You know, but it is for me, even though it's a horrific story, it's a good news story, because it's a good news story about the capacity of the church to embrace people who are very different and have had an interesting kind of past. You know, we do have that capacity, because also in terms of safeguarding, there's also this question about, well, what about the capacity for people to change? And what about understanding how, as you've so eloquently outlined, we are also a product of what other people do to us. I was fascinated by what you had to say, and you know, about having come from an abusive relationship, you're not really set up to kind of seek out healthy relationships, or in that sphere of healthy relationships to move forward. So Nicky, thank you for sharing that first bit about you, the first bit about you and Jesus, and just such an amazing insight. I always think, oh, how am I going to title this at the end of the day? Well, there's a bit of witchcraft in there. There's a bit of criminal record in there.
Yeah, no, forget those. They're in the past.
Well, that's right. I mean, they're in the past. Yeah, but it is good to hear. And I think the other thing I would say is that we don't often share experience, but I had a similar experience of, I mean, it was a deliverance experience and it was a prayer experience. I don't find it's interesting. I don't find it helpful to label precisely what's happening when we think about how we can be oppressed or possessed or whatever. I tend to think in much more, certainly when we're thinking about how the enemy works, I think about how the world can possess us. Something like alcohol can possess us and take it. So I understand it in much more deeper ways. But I think the biggest thing I get that I really resonate is that come what may, Jesus can deliver us and set us on a path to a wholesome future where we become the people that God intended us to be. And
absolutely.
However he does that, You know, that's up to God. And however
Yeah.
clumsily we describe it, we accept it's clumsy. But brilliant just to hear that first half.
Actually, that next time we speak with the next part, maybe we should jump off that thought, because that's a very interesting experience that I've had with the church in terms of how God does it. So,
right. Well, if we'll come back then, we have a little bit of a break and come back, and I'll look, and if that's okay, and so folks can have a bit of a think in the background. Thanks a lot, Nicky. See you in a little bit.
Okay.